All right, let's dive into this case file you sent us. Derrick Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge serial killer. We're going to unpack this whole thing together. The facts, the missteps, all of it.
What's really interesting here is this all happened while another serial killer was active in the same area, Sean Vincent Gillis.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, we'll get to him later, but just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. It adds another layer to an already really intense case.
Okay, so Derrick Todd Lee, born in 1968, died in prison in 2016. He was awaiting execution at the time. Even before the murder started, there are already some signs, right? Like this guy had a history of stalking women, peeping into their homes. It's kind of chilling to think about those early warning signs.
Yeah, it really makes you think about those missed opportunities. Like, what could have been done differently? What takes someone from, voyeurism to violence? It's something that criminologists and psychologists are always trying to figure out.
So then from 1998 to 2003, Lee really unleashed terror on Baton Rouge and Lafayette, Louisiana. At least 7 women were murdered. Imagine the fear that must have gripped those communities.
Absolutely. It was a very scary time.
Now here's a twist. Initially, police were looking for a white suspect.
Right. The early FBI profile and some eyewitness accounts all pointed in that direction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They even administered thousands of DNA tests to Caucasian men in the area. It was a huge effort, but it led to absolutely nothing.
That must have been so frustrating for investigators. I mean, how many other cases could have been impacted by that kind of bias?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thankfully, science plays a much bigger role today.
Definitely. So how did they finally connect Lee to the crimes?
Well, they found a DNA match under the fingernails of Geraldine DeSoto, one of the victims.
Ah, that was it.
Yeah, it was the link they needed.
This case really shows how crucial DNA technology has become. I mean, without it, who knows how long this might have gone on for?
It was a game changer, not just for this case, but for law enforcement everywhere. It's a standard tool now.
Speaking of turning points in this investigation, we have to talk about Diane Alexander, the survivor.
Yeah. Her story is amazing. It was July 2002. Lee broke into her home in St. Martin, Paris, beat her, tried to rape her. It's horrifying. But thankfully, her son interrupted the attack.
Wow. Her son being there must have been the only reason that he's alive today. So what happened after that?
Well, Lee ran off, but even after that experience, Diane Alexander was so observant. She gave the police a really detailed description of Lee and his car.
Ah, that's incredible.
Yeah, they were able to create a sketch from that and circulate it.
So they had the DNA evidence and a sketch of the suspect. What finally led to his arrest?
It was a combination of things. Good police work, a little bit of luck. The Zachary Police Department near Baton Rouge, they had dealt with Lee before for Peking Tom incidents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they recognized him from the sketch and realized they actually had a DNA sample from him on file.
They had his DNA from Peking Tom incidents.
Yep.
That's amazing. They connected those dots and they realized they had their serial killer in their records.
Pretty much. They contacted Baton Rouge. The DNA was a match. And they found him in Atlanta.
Wow. They extradited him back to Louisiana. The relief that those communities must have felt.
Oh, yeah. It must have been incredible.
What happened at the trial?
Well, he was convicted for the murders of Geraldine DeSoto and Charlotte Murray Pace, and he got a death sentence in the Pace trial. But there was a bit of a twist in this case.
Really? What do you mean?
During the psychiatric evaluations, Lee was consistently scoring really low on IQ tests, like averaging around 65.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it raised some questions about his competency to stand trial. Could someone with an IQ that low really understand the charges against them and participate in their own defense?
That's a tough question. On one hand, you have this man who did these horrible things. But on the other hand, if he doesn't understand what's happening, is it really justice?
Exactly. It's a tricky situation with no easy answers. In Lee's case, he was deemed competent. But it definitely sparked debate about the standards for competency, especially in death penalty cases.
So he was convicted, sentenced to death. But there's even more to this case.
Oh, yeah,
Right.
right.
So Lee was convicted for 2 murders, but DNA evidence linked him to 5 more. Randy Mabrewer, Gina Green, Pam Kittelor, Tranisha Kalam, and Carrie Yoder. It's unsettling to think that those are just the ones they could connect him to. What about all the other unsolved murders in the area during that time?
Well, newspapers at the time speculated that he could have been responsible for even more. But without DNA evidence, those connections are just speculation.
It leaves you wondering, right? Like, how many more victims are out there? Families still searching for answers.
It's definitely a chilling thought.
It's a reminder that even when a case is seemingly closed, there could be so much more beneath the surface.
Absolutely.
And then there's the other truth about this case. The fact that another serial killer was operating in the same area at the same time, Sean Vincent Gillis. It's a scary thought. The city of Baton Rouge was dealing with not one but two predators.
It's almost hard to comprehend, right? Two serial killers at the same time, terrorizing the same community.
How is it even possible?
Well, that's what investigators and criminologists were trying to figure out. How did these two men operate undetected for so long? Well, it's possible that the focus on Lee allowed Gillis to continue his crimes. All the resources and attention given to the Lee case, it might have taken attention away from other things.
Yeah, and the victims' families, knowing there were two serial killers in your community, is just unimaginable.
The impact on Baton Rouge was huge. It wasn't just the physical danger, but the mental and emotional toll. The fear, always looking over your shoulder, feeling like nowhere is safe. It must have felt like a nightmare.
Okay, let's talk about Sean Vincent Gillis. How were his crimes different from Lee's, and what led to his capture?
Gillis also targeted women, but his methods were much more calculated. He would stalk his victims, sometimes for weeks, planning everything out. He even took trophies from his victims.
Wow, that's chilling. It just adds another level of darkness to this whole thing. How many victims were connected to Gillis?
He was convicted of killing 8 women, but authorities believe there could be more. His first known murder was in 1994, but things really escalated between 2001 and 2004, right during the same time as Lee.
It's crazy how two serial killers with such different methods could operate in the same area for so long. What led to Gillis's capture?
Well, there were a few leads early on, some close calls, but in the end it was DNA evidence that got him. They had a sample from Gillis from another incident, and it matched DNA found at the crime scenes.
So, just like with Lee, DNA technology played a huge role. It really has changed criminal investigations.
Absolutely. These cases, and others like them, show just how important DNA evidence is, not just for catching the guilty, but for clearing the innocent, too.
But even with all the advances, the psychology of a serial killer is still a puzzle.
Oh, for sure.
What do we know about Gillis's background? Were there any signs?
Gillis had a history of mental illness, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder, and he was fascinated with violence, especially towards women.
Anything specific that foreshadowed his crimes?
Yeah. Years before the murders started, he was accused of stalking and attacking a woman, and there were times when he was caught peeping into women's windows. He also had a collection of pornography. Some of it showed violence against women.
It seems like there were signs, a pattern of behavior. It's tragic to think that things might have been different.
It's a question we ask a lot in these cases.
Yeah.
Could things have been different if there had been intervention, like mental health treatment, or maybe stricter consequences for his earlier actions? We just don't know.
It shows how complex these cases are, all the different factors.
Right.
We've gone into a lot of dark details today, but we can't forget about the victims. These women whose lives were taken.
Absolutely.
They were daughters, sisters, mothers,
You're right.
friends. Their loss is immeasurable.
It is.
We have to remember them, tell their stories, fight for justice. They're not just statistics.
You're absolutely right.
And we also have to remember all the people who worked so hard to catch these guys, the first responders, the investigators, the lawyers. They faced some horrible things,
They did.
but they kept going to find the truth, to protect their community.
Their dedication was amazing. They dealt with so much pressure, and in the end, they brought closure to a community that had been through so much.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Derrick Todd Lee case, there's so much to think about: the failures of the system, the missed opportunities, the human mind. It's scary to see the potential for darkness in the world.
It is, but it's also important to remember the resilience of people, the fight for justice, and the power of science to uncover the truth.
Yeah.
We have to learn from this case, stay vigilant, support those in need, and never give up hope.
That's a great point. Yeah, it makes you wonder about those safeguards. How can things go so wrong?
Definitely.
Did the focus on catching Lee actually help Gillis? Like, did it create blind spots that let him keep going?
It's possible all the resources going towards Lee might have meant they missed things with Gillis.
And for the victims and their families, to know there were two serial killers out there preying on your loved ones.
It's a lot to process. The impact on Baton Rouge was enormous. The fear, the anxiety, thinking that nowhere is safe. It must have been terrifying.
So let's talk about Gillis. How were his crimes different?
Well, like Lee, Gillis targeted women, but he had more methodical, more disturbing. He'd stalk his victims, sometimes for weeks, planning every detail. And he took trophies from the victims.
God, that's awful. How many victims were there?
He was convicted of killing 8 women, but authorities think there may be more. His first known murder was in 1994, but his spree really escalated between 2001 and 2004, the same time Lee was active.
It's incredible. 2 serial killers with such different methods, operating at the same time. How was he caught?
It was a long process, some early leads, some near misses. But in the end, it was DNA evidence again. They had a sample from Gillis from an unrelated incident, and it matched DNA at the crime scenes.
DNA really is incredible. It's changed everything about these investigations.
Absolutely. It's an essential tool now.
But even with DNA, the psychology of a serial killer is still so hard to understand.
Yeah, it's a complex puzzle.
What do we know about Gillis's background?
Gillis had a history of mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. He was fascinated with violence, especially against women.
Were there any warning signs?
Yeah. Years before the murders, he was accused of stalking and attacking a woman. He was also caught peeping into women's windows. And he had a collection of pornography, some of it depicting violence against women.
It seems like there were so many red flags. It makes you think, what if someone had intervened?
Right. What if there had been more support or stricter consequences for his earlier actions? It's a question that haunts a lot of these cases.
We've talked about a lot of dark things today, but it's crucial to remember the victims.
Absolutely.
These women, their lives were cut short. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, friends. We have to remember them.
We do.
And we have to acknowledge the people who worked to catch these men, the first responders, the investigators.
They did incredible work.
They faced unimaginable horror, but they never gave up. They brought some peace to a community that had been through so much.
Yes, they did.
As we wrap up our deep dive into Derrick Todd Lee and by extension, Sean Vincent Gillis, it's clear that there were failures, missed opportunities, and a reminder that the human mind can be a dark place.
Yeah.
But there's also hope, the resilience of the community, the pursuit of justice, and the power of science to help us understand even the darkest parts of our world.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us today. This case is a heavy one, but it's important to learn from it. Stay curious, keep exploring, and remember, knowledge is power.